Hey yo, welcome back to Dice Goblin. Today we're going to be talking about D&D versus Daggerheart, and we're going to compare the two systems together based on my experience of running for 6,500 hours for D&D and about approximately 140 hours for Daggerheart. And hopefully, based on my experience within the two systems, I'll give you my 2 cents about what I think of each system on the various different categories that we're going to be talking about. First off, we're going to be talking about the structured rules of the mechanical rules of D&D compared to Daggerheart. Mechanically speaking, D&D functions very simple. It has a D20 system where you roll a D20 based on the number you rolled. If it's high, you're probably going to do well. If it's low, you're probably going to do bad. And you crit on 20s and crit fails on 1. Mechanically speaking, the crits only matter during combat. Outside of combat, they have no real merit other than just rolling really high or really low. But homebrew states, like most people use, a popular homebrew is if you crit, you always succeed, and if you crit fail, then you always fail. The comparison to Daggerheart, you roll 2d12 systems. So with the 2d12, you're rolling a dice that you call hope, and the other dice you would call fear. And based on the number that you've gotten, you would have rolled with hope or with fear. So mathematically speaking, you're more likely to roll higher, quote unquote, on average, since the numbers are higher. But the actual mathematical probability is D&D is the D20 is a flat line because the chances of you rolling a 1 is the same chance of you rolling a 20. And while the 2d12 system is a bell curve. So with the bell curve means that the chances of you rolling a 10, 11, 12, 13 is generally the same as, it's not the same as you rolling a 2 or a 24. And based on those bell curve numbers, it causes the game mechanics to slightly be a little different, and that every plus modifier counts. While D&D's kind of very swingy probability causes for bonuses to not be, it would be useful, but not as useful as you would see it with a bell curve probability. And in saying that, that's just the two different types of styles of them rolling with each other. Everybody loves the D20 system because either grew up rolling D20s or have always used D20s because that's what they knew with D&D. And based on that alone, I found a lot more people falling in love with the D20 system more often than not and are a bit hesitant to change. But personally, I've always loved the Powered by the Apocalypse system and how narratively satisfying it is because of the various degrees of probability successes. So we'll talk about D&D where it's either you succeed or you fail, and you have crit fails and crit success if you really want to add that extra layer to it. But ultimately, it's either you succeed or you fail, and that's the two metric that you have. It's very black and white. While the Daggerheart system, you have degrees of successes. If you succeed with hope, you're effectively rolling, you succeed with whatever you're trying to do. If I attacked, you attack successfully. If you are trying to negotiate something, you get exactly what you want, so on and so forth. But then if you succeeded with fear, there's either a consequence or I get a fear token. And so then if I get a fear token, then you just succeed as if you succeeded with hope. You get the thing that you wanted, and then I could use my fear token later to do other stuff. But then if I decided to give you a consequence instead, then let's just say you're bartering with somebody and you're trying to get a discount. Instead of him saying, all right, fine, I'll give you the 20% discount. Instead, they'll go, you know what? I'll give you the 20% discount so long as you purchase this extra item now. And that extra item, you know for a fact, is a cursed item. But he'll give it to you so long as you purchase everything else with the extra stuff. So now you're getting the 20% discount and you're now quote unquote forced to take this cursed item or let go of that entire deal. And then it just becomes a quote unquote consequence. And then if you failed with hope, the consequences of that failure is semi softened or smaller. So let's just say we're bartering and then I failed with hope. You're like, nah, sorry, I can't do 20%. The best I could do is what I have on the price there, so no discount. And then he's like, oh, well, I failed, I guess. But then, so the consequences is instead of going negative or you lose the sale, you end up just paying full price. And then alternatively, when you fail with failure, he goes, not only do you fail to get the discount, he'll say to you, you know what? I'm insulted that you want such a crazy discount for whatever reason that he would be. And then he might call the cops on you or something crazy like that. I don't know, something that would create a problem. It's the equivalent of rolling a nat 1 in D&D if you're using the variant rules of like crit failures, because you would effectively crit fail with a failure with fear. So something pretty bad will happen. So depending on the scenario and what happens, then you can create something appropriately. As we discussed, there's 4 variables, and then there's a 5th one actually, and the 5th one is critting. Critting in the system of Daggerheart is matching the 1 1 2 2 3 3 12 12 10 10. It doesn't matter. Any number that you match, you crit. That, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the probability of critting is 8.3% compared to D&D's 5%. So it's a bit higher. It's a cool thing because when you roll really low and you crit, it's a very satisfying feeling. But critting, you not only get what you want, you get more of what you want. So maybe if you were talking about the guy who's going to give you the deal, you'd be like, you know what, I'll give you that 20% discount that you asked for, and I'll throw in an extra item. Here's an extra health potion and something like that. So that's the various different levels of successes. While D&D, if you succeeded the past, then yep, all right, you get your 20%. If you failed, you're back, nope, you can't get it. And I guess if you really want to add the crit success and crit failure mechanics, then that might create a variance. But we're talking about the base core rules and how they function. Next, the way they function from a combat point of view. D&D is very slow because it uses initiative and turn-based and everything, which, yes, you need to know exactly who goes next. But the way that it is designed, by design, is everybody waits until their turn comes in. And more often than not, I notice people like getting zoned out because of their phones or whatever and stuff like that, as until their turn comes, then they get to look at the map, and then they get to think, and they get to look at their spells. Yes, these are bad player habits, but more often than not, players do that, you know? I'm one of those players that, like, before my turn comes, I'm asking the GM, hey, I'm going to pre-roll mine now. Would you allow me to do this? And then he'll give me a nod for a yes. And I would have pre-rolled everything, and by the time my turn comes, I'm just narrating my attack. And then the next person goes. And I wish everybody does that, and I try to encourage my players to do that, and sometimes we do have that, which makes the game go a lot faster. But ultimately, that's just, it is what it is. Initiative, everybody rolls initiative to find out exactly what order they go in, and based on that, then they get to start acting. You have, this D&D is designed for combat. It is very structured and designed with detailed rules so then it can function in a very combat heavy metric. I think something like 80 or 90% of the abilities and spells all are like combat centric. So just to give you a perspective of what D&D is. So it is basically a combat focused game. While Critical Role, while Daggerheart is a very narrative focused game that functions a lot more on the very nature of role-playing your character to do various things. For example, even in classes like the bard or whatever, it's caked into the mechanic that you have to sing a song about sadness so then everybody gets this, or rhyme 3 words together as you give somebody that benefit, or compliment somebody to give them a hope, fear, stress, or HP back. And it's caked into the mechanic, and it's like almost tricking players into role-playing, which is a really cool way to encourage like marrying mechanics with roleplay in a harmonious way. That's a beautiful thing to do, which unfortunately D&D doesn't do, and it has it has a lot of flavor. Don't get me wrong, D&D has so much flavor, it oozes flavor, but you're only restricted to, okay, I attack and I deal this much damage. And yeah, you can say the same thing about Dagger. You can say the same thing about like, oh, well, it boils down to just rolling damage and taking a hit. But it's all about that narrative storytelling. And they have this concept where it's called tag team in Daggerheart, where you get to spend 3 hope. And by doing so, you get to choose another player on the table, and then you both narrate how you work together to perform a particular action. And then you both roll at the same time, which is basically their version of the advantage into the system. And then you choose which one is higher, and then you both roll damage and apply it together. And so you narratively have these anime-like scenes where you're jumping on each other's backs, flying over these things, and doing all these amazing stuff and creating all these cool effects, only to land these very cinematic moments. And the entire combat, the way that it functions, like D&D is very like centric on like initiative and turn order, while Daggerheart is very free from that. It does not have initiative. It's players act until they roll with fear or they fail. And it's an action economy based system instead of a initiative based system. So the players can keep acting And if they keep succeeding with hope, which the maximum hope I've ever gotten was a 12, action tokens that I've gotten was 12, and the players just keep acting hope, and then they keep on going. And then after that, when it's my turn, I effectively have 12 actions to attack them back. But then I'm also limited to how many actions I can perform. The monsters usually have a maximum of like 3 attacks a turn. And so I can't just attack 3 times and attack 12 times or whatever. But then what I can do is, if I had 12, I can attack 3 times, I'll have 9 left. I'll spend 4 of those action tokens to convert them to fear to immediately go again and attack 3 more times. I just did 3 attacks. So yes, my 12 attacks came down to only 6, but from a action economy point of view, from a creature that's so strong, a devastating turn. But they would have dealt the same thing on their 12 attacks consecutively. They would have dealt a whole lot of damage in that time. But then it's like that kind of tug of war. When they roll with hope, they gain hope points they can spend on hope stuff that they have for their characters. And whenever they roll with fear, I gain fear tokens that I pull the rope for the story to start swinging in my direction. It's a beautiful balance on this action economy that I truly love, because in D&D they have like legendary actions and other various different mechanics of like, oh, I can have 20 enemies or whatever on the board, and I'll have 20 actions, and then I'm spending my turn rolling dice to determine whether it's going to hit them or not. While if I have 20 enemies on the board for Daggerheart, even if I have 20 enemies, I can only activate 3 because they've only had 3 actions themselves. And that just feels fair because you're constantly kind of playing on the same bar, so to speak. So I'm very happy from that aspect in and of itself. I know this is going to sound very like biased towards like Daggerheart being a better system, but it's me talking about it from a narrative point of view, about how easy it is to run sessions, because I used to run D&D games in a very narrative way anyway. But when I went into combat, the very combat that I did would last 2 to 4 hours if I wanted to have like really big fights. And with that, now I could do 2 massive combats and half an hour of session in between with an hour and a half of roleplay, because I have like the kids games where I would run for about 2 hours, and I did that exact thing where I put 2 combat encounters which felt very like chunky and heavy, but because everything kept going and kept moving, it made the combat a lot faster. And I had 2 combats in a span of an hour and a half. That would have taken me at least 6 hours if I did in D&D, and that's something that I cherish a lot, because now I'm running combat almost every session because I actually quite enjoy combat, just never run it so much because it just slows down the game so much in D&D that I just focus on running my system. So yeah, long story short, the Daggerheart system is a lot more faster, a lot more freer when it comes to initiative, but also one of the greatest things that I've noticed is no player on my table actually is too distracted to look on their phone when you're in the middle of the combat, because everybody's engaged, because you don't know when your turn is next, because maybe somebody does something that you feel like is the perfect opportunity for you to jump in and do something. And I've even had like the quieter players kind of see everybody like go all over the place, and they're shouting all their actions and stuff like this, and they're happening, and they're rolling dice and this and they're happening. And when I go up to them, it's like, hey, what do you want to do? More likely than not, compared to before, they will have an idea of what they want to do, compared to before, like, okay, they'll wait for their turn, and then they'll look at their sheet, they'll look at the mechanics, and they figure out what they want to do, and then they come back and do something. And sometimes I would do that, where I would go to somebody, it's like, hey, what do you want to do? Like, and then they're looking at their sheet, and I'm like, cool, think about it. Who else wants to go? And then the game just keeps on going, because it does not stop because one person that can't play. So that is a beautiful thing that they've done. The advantage and disadvantage system of D&D is gold. It's a golden rule. Like, it's a golden mechanic. Rolling 2d20s and getting the higher is so good, or rolling 2d20s getting the lower. And I'm glad that Daggerheart followed suit and changed with the new rules to make the d12s you reroll it. The only thing that I would change personally is with the advantage you roll your hope again and choose which one is higher. But with disadvantage, I started telling my players that I would roll because it's disadvantaged, but then I would choose which one to use. I would either use the roll that I've done or their roll. And if I rolled something higher, I might choose it because then I want them to get fear, so then I can start accumulating fear tokens. And that's the caveat that I think it would be a really interesting thing to do. But yeah, started doing that stuff. The way armor class works in D&D is the same way their evasion works for Daggerheart. It's you avoiding damage entirely. but then they have armor slots in Daggerheart where you can block incoming damage, because the way they take HP is slightly different. They have thresholds, and if you take between your minimum threshold, you take 1 HP, majors take 2 HP, and severe you take 3, and usually players have 6 HP. The comparatively, when you have a group of players that are level 1 compared to a level 1 group of players of D&D, they will feel way more heroic. Like, I had a player where he goes, oh my god, we're level 1s and we're fighting that thing, which was this eldritch horror thing. I thought we were going to be fighting goblins and stuff, because that's the generic thing where you're level 1, you start killing goblins, because that's the only creature that you can actually feasibly encounter, or kobolds and stuff. And so it's a cool thing to see, because it does not restrict your character to be playing in a particular story arc. And having a level 10 party members, which is the maximum level for Daggerheart, comparatively to level 1s, you're actually growing laterally, not vertically. D&D, you grow vertically. You just keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Level 20 character versus 5 level 1 characters, he will just obliterate them in an action. While a level 10 character versus 5 level 1 characters, there's a good chance that they might win, or they'll make them sweat really hard, because action, it's not just action economy, it's just the way how just pure resources that they will have. They'll have more HP, more hope, more things on their side, more whatever, and then all he would have is more options, more spells, more abilities, more things, So based on these concepts, you're looking at a very specific type of style of play between the two, because D&D, you become way too strong. At level 5, you're almost like unkillable, while in in Daggerheart, you're level 10, you can still death. And I have put my players through that multiple times, just to show them that, even if you're very high level, doesn't mean you're immortal, and that's what I like, because it kind of keeps the players always on their toes, and knowing that death is always on the table, which is always a fun thing to do from a player point of view, because that consequences matter, and you shouldn't be expecting to jump into hell and expect to come back unless you've done the right things, so to speak, or got lucky about it. Anyway, the next thing I'll talk about is the comparison between the death metrics. D&D, when you die, you get to go and do death saves, and if you fail 3 times, you die. You succeed 3 times, you stabilize. And obviously, if you're not 20, then you get back up to 1 HP. While Daggerheart, you have 3 concepts. You either go out in a blaze of glory, where you auto-crit the next attack that you do, and you just die afterwards. It's a very heroic-esque kind of style of death. The next one is you roll scars, where you get to roll the d12, and if you got your level lower, then you suffer scars, and if you got higher, then you're fine. And that's every action the players do, so that creates a very dangerous things for players to deal with. And last but not least, it's your luck. So you roll the duality dice, and if you rolled with hope, you get back to 1 HP. You rolled with fear, you die, or if you crit, you get back all your HP and all your stress, which is a very fun thing to see. I've had about 4 players roll that and die, and I had 1 player roll that and live in the same session 5 times and kept rolling with hope, and it was a sight to behold. It was kind of funny. But yeah, the difference between the two is, I know they both kind of help the players not die so quickly, but I do like giving so much choice to the players during the death scene. It's like, if you want to make it about luck, then roll with luck. Then if you want to go out in the blaze of glory, go out in the blaze of glory. And if you want to just survive long enough for somebody to heal you, then do so, And sometimes you don't have one of the choices, so, such as like getting scars, because you're all alone. So you're forced to either be lucky or go out in a blaze of glory. So those things are also very interesting to see how that goes. Regarding attributes and skills, they don't have skills in Daggerheart, which I feel makes it less clunky, because then you're not focusing so much on, oh, roll me this skill or roll me that skill. You're just saying, you know what? This sounds like it's a finesse roll, so go ahead and give me a finesse roll. Or this sounds like an agility roll, so go ahead and give me a agility roll, or strength, and so on and so forth. They've used their wording very, very nicely of choosing the right attributes, so that it's self-descriptive. And just the way the difference in mechanical things between Daggerheart and D&D is Daggerheart uses a lot of narrative storytelling, while D&D is more like specific, detailed rules. and so loses out on specificity and some structure, but it gains back as flexibility and freedom. So one of my favorite things in the game actually is armor. Armor does not have any restrictions in its use by you putting it onto ability scores, or it has any restrictions on class. And so anybody can wear armor. I played a character last Friday. The entire concept of it was I was a bard, but I had plate armor. But then they actually did say that the armor doesn't have to be plate armor. It can be whatever you want it. Just the mechanical effects of plate armor. And I think one of the negatives was -1 to agility and -1 to evasion. And so I didn't care about those. And so I put it on, and I min-maxed my armor and got something like 15, which is pretty good after the update. And every time I got hit, I would narrate how I would block it. And for me, I would block it by playing my little drum. And then musical notes will appear, and they start to dance, and they multiply like babies or whatever as they keep going more and more and more, creating this shield. And by the time every time I take a hit, it just blocks it for me. By the time I ran out of armor slots, I started narrating how the musical notes are getting really lethargic and weak, and they're like crawling on the ground as they have no more energy anymore to keep dancing, so to speak. So that was my armor without me having to narrate. And I was wearing like a purple suit, like a pimp of sorts kind of deal. And I was a giant with 3 eyes, and I had a blindfold on and everything. So it had like a lot of flavor, the character, without having to say, look, I'm wearing plate armor. It's a very cool addition that they added, where it focuses more on the characters than it focuses on the mechanical effects of items, which I love. Feats is probably one thing that D&D, well, no, it's actually a few things. D&D beats Daggerheart in is feats, because having abilities or effects that transcend class, race, and community, and that you can pick to re-flavor your character to be different, that is something that D&D does really well, and it's really nice. Which then kind of ties into the next bit, where multiclassing. It takes you into level 5 to multiclass, and sure, you get like the entire class benefit of that new class, and you get only one of their 2 domains, but you can only get half of the level of the domain. But the downside is you can only get 1 domain card per level up anyway. And so if you're getting an entire new domain and you can't even access the higher level ones, it kind of defeats the purpose of multiclassing, because you're not tapping into that like really strong combo that you could be comboing with the domain cards. And I get I get that there could be some sort of negatives when it comes to various different things that they want to do with like a balancing point of view, but D&D does multiclassing really nice, because you can really marry certain aspects together and create a very unique character. And obviously there's min-maxers like myself out there who just want to create really, really powerful builds, and that's fine, because I do it myself as well. But you don't need to min-max to have fun with multiclassing. You can just have some really cool concepts and really cool flavors, and you may not be the strongest character in the game, but you'll have so much more options. And that's really cool. I love it. While in Daggerheart, it just feels so clunky. It feels a little weak, in my opinion. Just every time I look at it, it doesn't feel worth it. It's not worth just dipping into the same class and keep going. Like when you're at level 5 and you could potentially get a subclass, I would rather choose 2 proficiencies so I can increase my damage output by 2 additional dice, and I'll immediately start dealing way more damage per hit than getting a multi-class to something else. Then it kind of just does meh concept. That is my feeling about all this, because it's very sad to see that the abilities are very limited by their effectiveness. Yeah. The next thing we're going to talk about is accessibility and learning curve. So accessibility for the system, both of them, I think they both sit on the same pedestal, because realistically speaking, for both of them to function smoothly, you need the GM to know what they're doing. And if the GM knows the rules, then the players don't really need to know much. They just need to jump in on the table, have an idea of what they want to do, and then as they play, they can learn the game. Same thing with Daggerheart. You might create an argument saying that Daggerheart is slightly easier, but even then, it is such a small amount that it's not valid, you know. But a person who played D&D going to Daggerheart, I love how easy it is to transition, because there's a lot of similar concepts, similar ideas, similar things, classes. So anybody who played D&D can easily transition to Daggerheart without any problems. And I would like to think vice versa, but unfortunately, I went one way compared to the other. Yeah. And then after that, we have just D&D having a lot of stuff that you just have to keep track of because of the rules and the detailed stuff that I mentioned earlier. So something like 15 conditions that you have to know about, while Daggerheart has only 3, which is, I think, vulnerability, hidden, and restrained. And that's it. While D&D has like 15 of them, so paralyzed and stuff like that, etc. But if you put me down, because I'm a person who played both systems and know how to do both, I could create a character in 5 minutes in each, and it's relatively deep characters, not like fast, quick characters. So I'm gonna say that they're both relatively equal. But the thing that makes Daggerheart shine, way outshine D&D, is the game mechanics, the game master support. With the game master support, you're on a completely different playing field. D&D does not have a lot of game master support. I'm sorry whoever played D and they love the system and everything that it has, but honestly, you only can count on probably your whole hand how much things that D&D does to support you as a GM. You know, all games have, oh, this is how you should GM and this is how you build your world and blah blah blah. These are not tools to support you mechanically. The tools that they have done for D&D is legendary actions to help support the DM so they can have more action economy. Other tools is the dice, where if you fail, you miss, and if you hit, and maybe the crits mechanics if you really want to get into those. But that's pretty much where it stops. I can't think of anything else mechanically that you can use for D&D to support the GM. While Daggerheart, this is something that's super important. Challenge ratings for monsters and DCs for success, because obviously you need to know what those are. But for D&D, specifically D&D, as soon as you get to a certain level and the players get strong, especially if you give them magical items, because if you're not going to give magical items to players, then what's the point of playing D&D, right? Like, D&D is designed so that you can have magical items. It has so much magical items. And so you're supposed to give them magical items, and yet it throws off all of the challenges. Throws off the monsters challenge ratings, throws off the DCs of skill challenges, because of the fact that it's such a simple system to run things with, right? Like, you run stuff with, and then all of a sudden you have a plus gajillion on it, and then you could never fail. While if you look at all of this, if I wanted to create a challenge rating for a monster, like, I'm having level 11 characters fighting a challenge 26, and they won. And I did not give them a chance. Like, I actually ran away for like a few turns, just so the creature can just heal, because I healed 20 HP a turn. And so I did that, and I decided that, okay, 100 something HP, so now I'm going to run back. And they still managed to jump me and do this and this and that, and they managed to get me enough damage for me to... This is insane. That's challenge 26 creature being defeated by 11 level characters with magical items is such a powerful feat. It's supposed to be level 20 characters with magical items, and they'll struggle. And I wasn't holding back, like I said. Yeah, there was 6 people on the table, but still. In Dagger, unfortunately, when it comes to the support from the monster side, the tier levels, so 0, 1, 2, and 3, is also not that great. It's not... I don't know how they're balancing it, but it's not very strong. Like, the monsters' HP are not high enough. They don't have enough things in their arsenal to do stuff. I found myself homebrewing more often the monsters, which was so easy to do. I'll talk about that in a second. Than I did doing it any other way. So those monsters are not as strong, which is a very big disappointment. But Daggerheart supports you in more ways than one. The fear mechanic is such a beautiful system. When they roll with fear, and I get fear, I could choose to either take a consequence or fear. It gives me such a beautiful resource that I can actually attack in more ways than one. It doesn't have to be HP, because HP is not the only thing that matters anymore. Now the consequences are at the story level, because maybe the princess is on another building that's being abducted and taken away further. And there's a ticking time clock, which is another tool that they give you for Daggerheart to use as a GM, where you have a clock that is moving down every time somebody rolls with fear because they're running away. I spend a fear token to tick it even further, and then all of a sudden now they're sweating bullets. And then you can have a fear token to collapse a building and a floor to blockade or damage everybody around you. You could have a fear token to teleport the creature out of harm's way so they can run away and not deal with the party. And that's a handful of things that I literally just described from one mechanic that gives you so much tools to your arsenal as a GM to help tell a collaborative story. While before you have to kind of make it up on the fly, or if you do it, you're kind of doing it because you want to save the NPC. It's like, of course I want to save the NPC, but now I have a resource that you as players has given to me, and it is just part of the game now. And nobody ever feels upset about it because it's like, yeah, we rolled poorly, so it is what it is. And they just accept it, you know? So that's one tool. The next tool is the action economy. The action economy, you don't actually need to worry about action economy anymore. Because if the players can act, I get tokens, I act. And that's how action economy is dealt with. And so the beauty of this is the party never feels too overwhelmed. And at the same time, still feels stressful because of the number of enemies that are on the board. And still have to deal with all of them and so on and so forth. And it creates this beautiful dynamic of, oh my god, we have to deal with XYZ. And 1v party monsters work so well because of that same metric as well. And damaging players in more ways than one, like I described earlier. So I could damage their HP, their armor, or their stress. And if I really wanted, I can start damaging their scars, which takes away their hope permanently, which I've done. And it's very brutal, but I am pushing the boundaries of the system to see what works and what doesn't. And clocks to build tension. Like I built an entire... before, when I ran D&D like horror themes, I have to build the tension, I have to describe the things, I have to create the environments. Now, with the clock system, I literally will put a clock in front of them and say, hey, every time you roll with fear, this clock is going to tick down and something bad is going to happen, or the ghost is going to get revived, or this, and this is going to happen. And then I could do the same thing with the hope feature, where I put another clock. It's like, hey, you guys called for allies, they're going to come in 1d12 at 12 hope turns. So every time you roll with hope, it will tick it down. And when you've ticked it down all the way to 0, your ally comes in and they just comes into the scene and be like, oh, what did I miss? And blah, blah, blah. And then that could become helpful, you know? That is the beauty of the amount of tools that you get from the system. And it's supposed to GM so much that it creates a lot of momentum for the story to go in a very fun way, very fun direction. The last thing that I want to talk about before we wrap this up is flexibility and adaptability. I homebrewed so much for D&D, so much. I homebrewed worlds, I homebrewed items, I homebrewed classes, I homebrewed everything you can think of. And every time I did, I had to follow the strict guidelines of making strict rules. So this thing has to happen by having this, or you can achieve this by doing this, and so on and so forth. That is, because of the freedom of it, is a lot less strict, and it's so much easier to homebrew for. I am homebrewing monsters so much easier, but I'm homebrewing items in such a beautiful and elegant way because of the resources that I have. I have stress, I have hope, and I have armor slots to play with if I wanted to use special items to give the party some effects. So for example, I built this quill where it's like a magical quill that you can draw with, and you can spend a hope to create a tiny object and bring it to life. Or you can spend 2 hope to create a small object and bring it to life. Or, so for example, you can create a sword and then spend 2 hope and you pick up a drawn sword and then start swinging around, so to speak. Or you spend 3 hope to get a medium-sized object, or 4 hope to get a large object. So you can literally build the Wile E. Coyote tunnel and walk through the walls and then run through the mountain or whatever, and that kind of stuff. Yes, it sounds powerful. Yes, people can get super creative and break the game. But what's breaking the game other than just a narrative discussion between players and GM to see what the middle ground is for the story to become cooler? And so that was created based on the concept of hope and that item. And I was like, this is great, because the chances of them having 5 or 6 hope all the time is pretty slim. And so they can't do big, massive things all the time. But if they did and they had it, then why not? I think that'll be such a cool moment. Such a cool moment for them to achieve this kind of task. So these are the flexibilities that I loved by the Daggerheart system, which was so elegant and simple to use that made my life a lot easier to encounter and deal with sessions one after another. So overall, I say that if you like combat-centric sessions and you like the structure and the detailed things of having to know what your character can and can't do, then D&D works really well and has been working for 30 years now. But if you want something more narrative, which is kind of my style of role-playing anyway, and a little bit more freedom and a little bit more like you can do what you want, seamless combat, because of the fact that you're narratively describing it instead of like focusing on the nitty gritty of what's happening. When you like these kind of things, give Daggerheart a try. It's free. I'll figure it out to see how I can put it in the description for you guys, since we're still getting used to YouTube. But yeah, Daggerheart is a beautiful system. I am in love with it. It's a really, really good system. There's a few pet peeves that I have, which maybe I'll do a video about that on itself. But ultimately, it's such a good system because it supports me as a GM. And that is one of my favorite things about it, long story short. So for me, I choose Daggerheart over D&D, but D&D is a classic. It's been there for 30 years and it'll probably be there for longer. And despite all of the drama that happened around Wizards of the Coast and everything that they're doing, people still associate D&D as a brand. People love D&D. People say they are D&D players, not role players. So that is in and of itself a power. And so it's kind of sad because I had a player the other day where they came in wanting to play D&D because I haven't updated my website. But I told them that I've converted to the Daggerheart system. And they felt a little bit, I guess, overwhelmed, lack of a better term. And they said, no, I've already spent time and money on D&D. I don't want to play anything other than D&D. And they just walked away. And it's really sad because even though personally I feel like overall it is a better system, in my opinion, it's a more modern system. D&D needs a little bit of a modern upgrade, by the way. But it's a more modern system. And people are not willing to do it because they spent that money and time on it, not realizing that it's free, first of all, but secondly, it's a better investment for the future if you enjoy more narrative games. But if you don't and you enjoy combat stuff, there's plenty of groups out there, and that's what you need to find, and that's what you get to enjoy and play, and all the power to you. And I think that'll be a fun thing to do. I still have one D&D group that I still run, and I'm putting them through literal hell, and if they're seeing this, well, I'll work my hardest until I kill you all so we can start a Daggerheart campaign. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe and hit that like button, and comment anything you liked or you didn't like about the video, or maybe your insights on which one you like more, Daggerheart or... And yeah, catch you in the next video. Cheers.